This is just the beginning.
Welcome to the Axios Latino LGBT Historia virtual event. I'm Russell Contreras, the race and justice reporter at Axios, and I'm coming to you from Rio Rancho, New Mexico. Thank you to Bank of America for making this conversation possible on Latino LGBTQ issues. Welcome to our audiences on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, and of course, Axios.com. Join the conversation today on Twitter with @Axios and use the hashtag Axios Events. Over the next 30 minutes, I will unpack the state of LGBTQ rights, advocacy, policymaking in the Latino community, and how the pandemic has impacted resources for underserved LGBTQ Latino individuals. Our first guest is Congressman Ritchie Torres of New York, joining us from Washington, D.C. Representative Torres, thank you for joining here with us at Axios.
It's an honor to be here.
Congressman, before we get started on the contemporary issues facing LGBT Latinos today, tell us, this is more than a century after Stonewall. Often Latinos get overlooked in their struggle for gay and lesbian liberation. How instrumental were Latinos in that struggle?
Well, historically, the story of the LGBTQ civil rights movement has been whitewashed. But increasingly, there's been recognition of the contributions of LGBTQ Latinos like Sylvia Rivera, but it took a long time coming. To listen to the conventional narrative of Stonewall, you would think that LGBTQ progress was only built on the shoulders of white men.
Now, that has changed over the years, and Latino, especially our LGBT activists, have asserted themselves and placing themselves in this history. But yet there's more to be done. After marriage equality, people thought the movement would die off, but yet there's still some ongoing issues that remain. What remains to be done in the areas with LGBT Latinos?
Well, I'll answer your question just by way of a story. A few years ago, we had a statewide lobby for the LGBTQ community in New York State known as the Empire State Pride Agenda. And in December of 2015, several months following the Obergefell decision, which made marriage equality the law of the land, the Empire State Pride Agenda announced that it was closing its operations because the mission had been accomplished. And that statement was met with a backlash, particularly from LGBTQ communities of color. We have to be careful not to declare mission accomplished in a post-Obergefell world. And I think communities of color in particular recognize that marriage equality is only one component of legal equality, and legal equality is only one component of social equality. The holy grail of LGBTQ legal equality is the Equality Act. But even if we pass the Equality Act, there will continue to be LGBTQ youth who are bullied by their peers at school, who are evicted from their homes by their own parents. You have members of the trans community, particularly trans youth of color, who are facing unprecedented levels of violence. You have LGBTQ elders who are facing alarming rates of social isolation and depression and anxiety. So we have a distance to travel before achieving LGBTQ equality, not only in a legal sense, but also in a broader social sense.
You mentioned trans youth. Right now, there are a number of states that have introduced or passed bills to prevent trans youth from participating in sports. What still needs to be done at a federal level around issues of equality?
I remember back in 2014, the Republican Party and George W. Bush ran on a platform of opposing marriage equality in various referenda across the country. And it was a successful strategy back then. And there's a sense in which we are witnessing the revival of the culture wars. The difference between then and now is that the new culture war is specifically targeting the trans community. The Republicans have been waging a deeply cynical campaign of scapegoating and fear-mongering against the trans community. There's a false narrative that the Equality Act is an existential threat to religious liberty, to womanhood, to female athletics. There are Republicans who make hyperbolic claims that there are going to be sexual assaults and rapes in bathrooms, and that has led Republican-led state legislatures to pass so-called bathroom bills. So the demonization of the trans community has been taken to a new extreme. I mean, you would think as time goes on, Republicans would become more accepting of LGBTQ people, but quite the contrary. Republicans have doubled down on transphobia.
Should there be something done at a federal level around IDs to allow people to correct or change gender identities?
Yes. The IDs, our identification should reflect the identity we choose for ourselves. That strikes me as entirely reasonable. We've done it locally in places like New York City. We ought to do it nationally in the United States. And the same is true of birth certificates.
Right. The difference between now the culture wars that you said from George W. Bush's time in office to today is now we have a growing number of LGBT Latino elected officials, both at a local level and a federal level. You're one of our first Black Latino LGBT elected persons out in Congress. Is this moment for you something that you embrace, or is this something that you shun for around the issue of equality?
I fully embrace it. You know, in the history of the United States Congress, there have only been about 130 Latino members, and none of them were openly LGBTQ until I was sworn in on January 3rd. So every time I set foot on the House floor, I cannot help but feel the weight of history on my shoulders. You know, a wise person once said, if you don't have a seat at the table, then you're probably on the menu. And my election means that LGBTQ Latinos will finally have a seat at one of the most powerful tables, the United States Congress. And that is a breakthrough that I proudly and vocally celebrate.
Now, you've been very open about your road and this journey to the seat that you have now. Often we hear stories, especially in Latino communities, of our LGBT communities, our members facing homelessness, poverty, because either being shunned by family or by their peers. Is this still going on in 2021, and what should we be doing about it?
LGBTQ youth face disproportionate rates of housing insecurity and homelessness, suicidal ideation, and suicide. You know, if you have no access to permanent housing, it has a destabilizing effect on every aspect of your life. It makes you more vulnerable to mental illness and substance abuse, more vulnerable to contact with the criminal justice system, and more vulnerable to suicidal behavior or ideation. You know, it's no accident that LGBTQ youth, who have among the highest rates of homelessness, also have among the highest rates of suicide. There is a deep connection between health and housing.
And what about portrayals in public media or popular media? We know that whenever there are movies, shows, TV shows, they tend to stereotype, especially Latino LGBT characters. What should be done in terms of Hollywood, TV, portrayals in media to accurately have a portrayal that is reflective of this community?
Look, it's important to have diversity and representation. You know, whether you are an actor or an elected official, when you are in the public square, you can have a powerfully normalizing effect on the American people. You know, when I was elected as the first Afro-Latino member of Congress back in November of 2020, you know, it was a remarkable stride, but I hope over time it becomes unremarkable. Right? So the more LGBTQ, Latinx representation we have in the media, the more unremarkable it will become.
In our final 90 seconds here, you do acknowledge the historic moments in your election in your seat. And yes, you are in your first term. So I don't want to put pressure on you, but what do you want to be remembered in your time in office as someone who has this historic space and someone who can make a difference? how would you want us to remember you?
I want to be remembered as an advocate for the South Bronx, as an advocate who fought to radically reduce poverty in America, who fought for safe, decent, affordable housing, who fought to give people a fighting chance at a decent and dignified life. That's how I wish to be remembered.
In our 30 seconds we have left, did you ever imagine that yourself in your darkest days that you and I have talked about in the position that you are in today?
My life has been a journey from public housing and poverty in the Bronx to the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. And I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be a member of Congress. I feel like the most grateful person in America. And I pinch myself every time I enter the Capitol. And I have a problem.
Congressman Torres, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We hope you come back here again, here at Axios
Absolutely.
Latino. Thank you, brother. And next, we'll have a view from the top segment with my colleague, Chief People Officer at Axios, Dominique Taylor.
Thank you, Russ. I'm Dominique Taylor, the Chief People Officer at Axios, and joining me from Bank of America is Managing Director, Philanthropic Market Executive, Patricia Chavez. Welcome, Patricia.
Hi, Dominique. It's great to be here today.
Patricia, you began your career as a teller, and now you're a Managing Director and Philanthropic Market Executive. Tell us about this role at Bank of America.
Well, Dominique, I've had a long journey with Bank of America working in several different lines of business. In my current role, I started this role about 2.5 years ago, and I work as a philanthropic market executive, leading a team of professionals, and we work with private foundations, charitable trusts, and nonprofit institutions. And we work with them to help them fulfill their mission and to have impact in their communities. The thing I like the most about my job is that we help our clients fulfill their mission. We help our employees who are working with our clients and delivering the full capabilities of the bank. And at the end of the day, between what we do with our clients, the advising, the consulting, the investment management side of the equation, to what they're doing to have impact, society benefits overall. So it's a really exciting role that I have.
It sounds like a fascinating journey and a very exciting role indeed. And Bank of America has committed $1.25 billion towards driving racial equality and economic opportunity. Can you talk about this commitment and specifically how it's helping to support Hispanic and Latino communities across the country?
Yeah, it's thank you for raising that. And it's been a very tough year in the last year, but really proud to work for a company that has this focus around these issues. This $1.25 billion commitment, it focuses on 4 pillars: healthcare, jobs, small business, and housing. And one way we brought it to life in California and to support the Hispanic Latino community is through our partnership with Altamed. Altamed service area is primarily, it's a healthcare provider and they're across California and the West Coast. And they primarily serve, their service base is very predominantly Hispanic Latino. That being said, with our $500,000 commitment to them, we really worked with them on adjusting to the needs during the pandemic, offering and helping them provide services such as increased clinic and staffing care, coronavirus testing, treatment, triage, to advice nurses that are available there. That was part of what the programming supported. And I'm very proud to be part of that, especially seeing the needs in California and the disproportionate impact that happened to the Hispanic Latino community in terms of their roles as frontline workers and caretakers. Another focus we had was around the education piece. And through our $25 million commitment around education, reskilling, retooling, educating the future workforce, Bank of America committed $25 million to 21 colleges, universities, community colleges, Hispanic serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities as well, and really with the role of creating pathways to jobs and to really good jobs at the end of the day. So we're very excited about that work.
Very worthy investments, it sounds like, given the tumultuous time we're in, especially for these communities. And then what types of things has Bank of America done to support its own Hispanic and Latino employees?
Well, I'll start in a couple of different ways. If we start looking at our board of directors, the whole commitment around diversity and inclusion, it starts at the top. And I'm proud to work for a company where our board of directors is nearly 50% diverse. Our management team is very diverse. And so that's fantastic. Bank of America is one of 5 S&P 100 companies that has 6 or more women on their board. And a Latina on their board who's been very inspirational and joined a lot of events with us is Monica Lozano. She makes herself available to our employees, and through her leadership, she helps us see what's possible. Along those same lines, from a recruiting perspective, so I start with the board, I'll start with our recruiting. We recruit from Hispanic serving institutions. Over 50%, I think it's close to 55% of our campus recruiting is diverse, with a large proportion being Hispanic Latino. So we're very proud of that. We recruit from 16 Hispanic serving institutions, including one in Puerto Rico. So it's exciting work. And then if I take it a step further, our employee networks, we have the HOLA, which is Hispanic Latino Organization for Leadership Advancement. And we also have our LGBTQ plus chapters, both very large and global. And through these chapters, we work on career development, retention, support. And really that does make a difference for our employees in terms of their career growth and development. Some key programs that we have in terms of benefits is 16 weeks paid parental leave. That's so important. Family planning reimbursement for adoption, fertility, surrogacy. If I think about what happened the last year during the pandemic, it's really we have a life event service team, and they've provided resources and support from healthcare, teledoc, and all kinds of great services that were truly in need during the pandemic. Some of the work that they also offer includes gender transition awareness and offering counseling, benefits, services. So the list goes on and on, Dominique. I would say from our leadership down, we really look for Bank of America to have an employee base that mirrors our community. And it starts with our board of directors, to our hiring strategies, to the retention strategies that we have. One more thing I didn't mention is we do have executive councils within our company. We have the Hispanic Latino Executive Council, and we also have a council of our LGBTQ plus executives that started in 2015. And this is also another resource that focuses on recruiting, retaining, and developing talent. And that's not just at the executive level, it's every level of our company. So this focus is across the board, and truly has had an impact in my career as I've leveraged all these services in one way or over the other in my time with Bank of America.
But that's fantastic. It sounds like a truly holistic and thoughtful approach to DEI and these through these initiatives. So thank you for sharing your story, for these insights, and for joining me today.
Thank you, Dominique.
And thank you to Bank of America for sponsoring these important conversations. And now back to my colleague, Russ Contreras.
Thanks, Dominique. Our final guest is Eddie Martinez. He is the executive director from the Latino Equality Alliance, joining us from Los Angeles, California. Eddie, thank you for joining Axios. It's great to be with you.
Great to be here, and thank you for the invitation to have this conversation.
Before we get started on the contemporary issues involving LGBT community in the Latino community, talk to a little bit about the Latino history in gay liberation in Los Angeles. We know before Stonewall, there was a similar uprising at the Cooper Donut facility in Los Angeles. And there's this long history of Latinos being in the gay and lesbian struggle. How different was this in Southern California compared to the rest of the world?
Well, I mean, Los Angeles is very unique. I mean, we're a melting pot, but, we were once part of Mexico. And so we're very rooted here, with the indigenous population and with folks from the Mexican heritage and culture here. So it's any history when it comes to queer history in Los Angeles would involve people of color, particularly brown people. And, and behind the scenes, a lot of this activism that took place back in the 50s and 60s, 70s, there were always queer Chicanos in that movement. And so it's a journey, for our community to go from where we were maybe 40, 50, 60 years ago to now, and to see the evolution of our gente involved in the whole queer movement.
Racism has played a role in Chicano history and the way we express our masculinity. How hard has it been for our community to embrace LGBTQ issues as marriage equity becomes more acceptable, as people start to understand the human rights of gay and lesbian people? Was it a long struggle for Latinos, or was it something that has came natural to us?
Yeah. It's we got to understand, our roots. There's machismo. We're embedded like within the Catholic faith for most of us, and so sometimes there's that oppression we get from the Catholic Church, and we have to struggle and navigate through that, through our faith. But I think over the years we have evolved, and especially the younger generations have been very active in fighting for LGBTQ rights. But there's a struggle because sometimes it's embedded in our culture. Perfect example, what we see with the Mexican soccer team and their fans using that gay slur. They're struggling with it. They're struggling to have their fans be quiet. And, and I see the conversations on social media. A lot of the folks that support it say it's what's tradition. It's not really meant that way. Well, I think a lot of the folks that are supporting that gay slur don't understand the impact it's having on folks. And it's how do you break tradition? If a lot of people think it's culture. I have some people saying it's canceling culture, cancel culture, trying to take that word away. So it's having these rough and tough dialogues with folks. But, at the end of the day, if you keep humanizing it, you start winning support over from folks.
We started to see multi-ethnic coalitions built around marriage equality in the 2000s, when we started seeing bills proposing to try to ban marriage equality in some states. What happened in California? And can you talk a little bit about what the coalitions that built to defend marriage equality in California?
Well, I could talk about the journey of Latino Equality Alliance. We were founded as a response to the passing of Proposition 8, the anti-marriage equality California ballot initiative, which passed in 2008. At that time, there was a lot of finger pointing. A lot of the mainstream LGBTQ folks were pointing fingers at communities of color for not supporting marriage equality. But then, people of color were saying, well, what? You never came into our neighborhoods. You never had those conversations with us. And you're not fighting for our issues. And so what came from that whole movement was a need to be intersectional, was a need to be in solidarity with other issues. And I think at the time, that's when the LGBTQ folks realized, if we're going to win support for our rights, we got to support the rights of others. And then that's when a lot of folks started building coalitions and being in solidarity with workers' rights, with immigrant rights. And I think that's where we see the movement today is about to be intersectional with other movements, so we could be together and strengthen numbers and support each other.
Now, today we have probably the highest number of gay Latino, lesbian Latino elected officials across the country, both statewide, local offices, and federal offices. What happened in the past 5 years that catapulted LGBT Latino politicians to office?
I think we all got empowered. We have organizations like Honor Pack that provided a space to do some leadership development with young brown leaders, and to get them to that space. Like my organization, what we do is we develop young leaders. We engage them in high school. We get them to go to college. And the goal is to create that pipeline of leadership development and to get them into spaces where they could be actively involved in the community, join a commission, become an elected official. So I think where we're beginning to see is the fruits of our labor over the past 10 years of really engaging young folks and getting them into position of leadership in their local communities.
Now, right now across the country, we're seeing various state proposals attempting to ban transgender students from student activities like sports. What's happening among Latinos, the LGBT community, in response to these bills? Are they forming resistance to it, or are they informed about what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, there is a national movement. We talk to each other. There's a national conference. It's called Creating Change. In that, there's a space where brown queer activists, we come together and we talk about these issues. And I know in all these different states where these bills are being trying to be passed, they're organizing and they're educating, and we're also phone banking to our folks in the other states to make sure that they defeat these bills and make sure that our trans brothers and sisters are treated equally, just like the rest of us.
Now, we know that among homeless queer youth, there are a high percentage of Latinos in this population, whether it's in Los Angeles, Denver, Houston, and New York. What can be done to address the crisis of queer Latino teens in our metropolitan areas?
Well, we got to think about prevention. We got to think about what's causing folks to become homeless. And so what we need to do is make sure that we fight for safe schools, healthy schools. We make sure we fight for healthy homes and neighborhoods and provide a space for folks where there's increased family acceptance and there's less chance of abusing alcohol and drugs, and making sure that these individuals have that higher education or have the tools to be successful in life. But that all comes down to making sure they have nurturing and healthy and safe environments to grow up in.
Now, we know among queer culture, sometimes the Latino gay man or the gay woman is sometimes objectified as this object. It looks upon as they're building solidarity with us, but we can be objectified, and our bodies be objectified. What is the response, especially among queer Latinos, to say, hold on, wait a minute, we appreciate the love, but we are talking about human rights, not objectification?
Well, we got to challenge the system. You know, I have always questioned some of the gay media, the images they use, some of them highlight, the image of a gay white man with nice bodies, and then when they finally have a person of color, it's a person of color that is showing his body, looking a certain way. And what we need to do is challenge the system, challenge them and say, you know what, we're more than just our looks, our bodies. It's about our soul. It's about like what we can contribute to society, and it's about familia. And that's what we need to highlight. So we need to speak up and organize and make sure we challenge the system so they could better represent who we are ourselves.
In the final 60 seconds we have, can you talk a little about queer refugees and queer immigrants trying to come from Central America? Often we overlook them in the detention centers. What challenges do they face, and what are we overlooking when we look at this population?
They're human. They're struggling, and we got to support our brothers and sisters. We got to make sure that what's happening probably in their countries is the result of how we are American respond and whatever policies we have in those countries. But they're also dealing with not having acceptance, and I think we need to have compassion. We need to provide a space over here in the U.S. so they could flourish as human beings, and we got to have immigration reform.
Eddie, it was a pleasure having you. We hope you come back again here with Axios.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for another virtual conversation that has made everyone smarter, faster. And thank you to our sponsor, Bank of America, for making this event possible. For more information or to sign up for my newsletter, Axios Latino, visit axios.com/newsletters, or on the Axios app, you can find a link. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on axios.com.